All right, let's dive right into the deep end of moral philosophy. We're going to tackle a huge question today. How do we actually decide what the right thing to do is? It's a question that's been debated for literally centuries, and, well, it leads to some pretty fascinating and, frankly, sometimes disturbing places.
So let's kick things off with a classic. Just think about this for a second. If you could do one thing that's technically wrong, but you knew it would lead to a genuinely better outcome for everyone, is it still wrong? This is exactly the kind of thing that keeps philosophers up at night.
Okay, let's make this even more specific. What if we're not talking about some huge crime? What if it's just a tiny white lie? You know, one that costs you absolutely nothing, but it brings a little bit of joy to a whole bunch of people. And this is where we get to this really powerful, kind of intuitive idea. Maybe what really matters are the consequences of what we do.
So that line of thinking leads us to a theory called act consequentialism. And it's super simple and direct, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense when you first hear it. To figure out the right thing to do, you look at your options, you figure out the likely results, and you pick the one that creates the most good in the world. Seems easy, right?
Yeah, on the surface, it seems like this perfect logical system for being a good person. Just maximize the good.
But what happens when we really push this idea, when we take it to its logical extreme? Well, as we're about to see, this simple common sense rule can lead us down some pretty dark paths. I mean, think about this really chilling scenario, which comes straight from the theory's own logic. If an act of murder, and yes, I mean murder, somehow created just a tiny bit more overall good than anything else you could have done in that moment, then a strict act consequentialist would basically have to say, yep, that murder wasn't morally wrong.
And that is the huge problem, right? We have a theory that ends up justifying actions that we all feel deep down in our bones are just plain wrong, no matter what the outcome is. This direct, act-by-act calculation completely clashes with our most basic moral compass. We've got a serious problem.
So does that mean the whole consequences idea is a bust? Well, not exactly. It just might mean we're aiming it at the wrong target. What if instead of judging every single act, we started judging the rules that we all live by?
And you know, this isn't some brand new idea. Way back in 1712, the philosopher George Berkeley put it just beautifully. He basically argued that we should create our general rules to help everyone, but our day-to-day choices, those have to be guided by the rules themselves, not by some constant, frantic calculation about the greater good.
And that's how we get to the core of rule consequentialism. It's really a two-step process. First, you figure out the ideal set of moral rules, the ones that would create the best possible world if pretty much everyone followed them. And second, an action is wrong if it breaks one of those rules. See the shift? It's not about what will this one act do, but what would happen if we all live by this rule.
Okay, but that just leads to another question, right? How do we even build this so-called ideal rule set? What kind of good are we even shooting for here? Is it just about creating the biggest pile of total happiness? Or is there maybe more to it than that?
Now, what's really interesting here is how this table messes with our instincts. Take a look. In alternative 1, sure, the grand total of welfare is higher, but look at that inequality. It's massive. Then you have alternative 2. The total's a bit lower, yeah, but everyone is way better off than the worst off people in the first option. Which world actually feels better? Just chasing the highest total doesn't seem to capture the whole picture.
And that feeling that maybe we should focus on the worst off, that leads to this cool idea called prioritarianism. The core thought is simple. Helping someone matters more, morally speaking, when that person has less to begin with. So under this view, our ideal rules wouldn't just be about the total score. They'd be specifically designed to level up and prioritize the most vulnerable people in society.
And look, these rules have to actually work in the messy real world, right? They can't just be some abstract fantasy. That means you have to factor in all these practical costs, like how hard is it to teach a rule to kids? What do you do when you know some people just won't follow the rules? How can we create a system where we can actually trust that other people will comply? And let's be honest, how much can we really ask of people, since we're all naturally biased towards ourselves and our families? The best rules have to be practical.
But, no theory is bulletproof. And rule consequentialism has definitely faced some tough criticism over the years. So let's really put this theory to the test and tackle two of the biggest, most famous objections against it.
Okay, objection number 1, the collapse argument. Critics say that if you really wanted to make the best possible rule, you'd have to keep adding exceptions for every single time breaking the rule might lead to a slightly better outcome.
Pretty soon, the rule gets so complicated it's not even a rule anymore. It's just act consequentialism wearing a trench coat and a funny hat. I mean, just look at this. Which one of these actually works for a real society? A simple, clear rule like don't steal? Or one that has 1,000 different subclauses and basically invites everyone to try and find a loophole? And that's the perfect defense. Remember all those real-world costs we just talked about? A super complex rule is a nightmare to teach. It creates loopholes for selfish people, and it completely shreds the social trust that simple rules are meant to build. The cost of all that complexity is way higher than any tiny benefit you'd get from all the exceptions. So the simpler rule actually produces way better consequences in the long run. Okay, so the second big objection is kind of the opposite. What if you have a great rule like never lie, but following it in one very specific, very extreme situation is going to lead to an absolute catastrophe? Are you really supposed to just blindly worship the rule and let disaster happen?
And look, this is a really serious point. It's a scary thought, but rule consequentialism is smarter than you might think. It has this clever built-in escape hatch for exactly this kind of problem.
And here's the brilliant part. The best possible set of rules for a society would, of course, include one final overarching rule, a rule that says you must break the other rules if that's what it takes to prevent a catastrophe. So if following the don't break a promise rule would lead to genuine disaster, this master rule kicks in and says, no, you have to break that promise. Now, it is absolutely crucial to get this. This isn't some backdoor way to just do whatever you want. This disaster clause only kicks in when the stakes are unbelievably high. It's not for getting a little bit more good here and there. It's for preventing an enormous amount of bad. It gives the system the flexibility it needs for real emergencies without destroying the stability of the rules we need for everyday life. So, when you put it all together, it really comes down to these two huge shifts in how we think. First, we judge the rules, not the individual acts. And second, we build those rules for the real world, factoring in everything from teaching costs and human nature all the way to having a prevent disaster clause. And that, right there, is the big takeaway. Rule consequentialism is asking us to zoom out. It's saying that morality isn't about frantically trying to optimize every single moment of every day. It's about building and committing to a stable, reliable, and beneficial system of rules that we can all share and live by.
So let me leave you with this to chew on. In our own lives and in our society, what do we really think matters more? The flexibility to bend or break the rules for what we think is a better outcome right now, or the long-term stability and trust that comes from a set of rules we all agree to follow? That's a tension that's really worth thinking about.